Hey everyone, and welcome to episode 3 of the Alec Walt Show. I'm your host, Alec Walt, alongside the co-founder of Down the Block Sports, the host of the High Press, Mr. Conor Robinson. Conor, welcome back to the Alec Walt Show. You're currently 2 for 3 to start our new channel.
Happy to be here, man. It's a Friday. It's everything's going great. So I'm ready to just kick things off. We got a very special guest today, right?
Yeah, we got a very special guest. As most of you know, there was a massive news earlier this week in the NFL. Drew Brees, one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time, announced his retirement from the NFL. Joining us to discuss that retirement is Michael Balko, the host of the Michael Balko Show, the Saints writer for Who Dat Dish, and a contributor for NBAanalysis.net and NFLanalysis.net. Michael, welcome to the podcast. How you doing?
I'm good. Thanks for having me on today, guys. I appreciate it.
Hey, thank you very much for joining us. So, like we mentioned before, Drew Brees announced his retirement from the NFL. When you received that notification, what was your reaction?
I mean, probably the same as every other Saints fan. We kind of knew it was coming. Obviously we paid our dues to Drew Brees on our social media platforms, respectively, for all he's done for us in the past. I don't even remember, like 15, 16 years, something like that, whatever it is. But yeah, we just kind of all expected it to happen. Obviously our offense is not going to look the same without Drew Brees, at least with the hope of Drew Brees returning for games, starting the season, whatever the case may be. So yeah, it's a little bittersweet. He's the greatest quarterback in Saints history, and I could argue NFL history, and it's going to be tough to lose him, but I'm excited for what the future holds.
What do you think obviously you touched on it, greatest quarterback in the organization's history. What do you think his legacy is, kind of overall for the whole league?
So the game kind of remembers him, in my opinion, as like just a down-to-earth dude. Like everyone loves Drew Brees. You don't the only people who seem to hate Drew Brees is like Skip Bayless and and like analysts, so to say. The experts, they hate Drew Brees, but all the players, like Russell Wilson specifically has idolized Drew Brees amongst many other NFL quarterbacks. They've always learned a lot from Drew Brees. They always admire the way he handles himself, approaches himself. I know on my podcast, I've actually interviewed a couple of his teammates, and I always be sure to ask, like, what's it like playing with Drew Brees? And their answer is always the same. His preparation, his approach to the game, regardless on if you have a game that week or not. Every practice is a game-like situation for Drew Brees, and I got to assume that's probably the biggest reason why he's been so successful in his NFL career.
Yeah, he's been extremely successful. A lot of amazing moments throughout his entire career with the New Orleans Saints. When you look back at his career, what are some moments that you're always going to remember when future generations ask you about number 9? What highlights are you going to remember from him?
There's too many to even to remember, but probably the game that always stands out to me is Drew Brees' 7 touchdown pass game a few years back. I think it was against the Jacksonville Jaguars. Yeah, I'm pretty sure it was against the Jacksonville Jaguars.
Probably.
But yeah, that game's always going to stick out to me. But I'm always going to kind of remember Drew Brees as just a very reliable quarterback under center, except for like the past couple seasons where he's been hit with the injury bug a little bit more. He's always just kind of been the guy that we can expect week in, week out to just produce numbers, whether they're off the charts numbers or a little bit under the par numbers. There's never really, except these past couple of years, you could argue that there's been a game where Drew Brees just hasn't performed well at all. Like you can always expect a couple touchdowns, whether it's passing or even sneaking a little ball over the end zone for Drew Brees, something like that. You can always expect that even if Drew isn't playing the best game, that he's going to be damn sure somebody on the field is playing a good game. Whether it's, he's going to alter the game plan a little bit and tell Sean Payton himself that, hey, we need to run the ball a little bit more this week with Alvin and Latavius in the backfield or something along the lines of that to make sure the team wins. He's always been a team first player. He doesn't really care about his own numbers and stats, even though he's had quite a few of record breaking numbers and stats. So he doesn't really ever seem to care about them. He's never a rah-rah, headline type of player. He's always just kind of been a humble, down-to-earth guy. And, I think that's what every Saints fan is going to remember him as.
So looking at the Saints right now, I had to deal with this last year as a New England Patriots fan. Everyone can see the banner behind me. When the legendary QB leaves, everyone asks, what next. For the New England Patriots, it was Cam Newton. For the New Orleans Saints, it's going to be one of Jameis Winston or Taysom Hill. We can get into some of the specific contracts in the next question, but if you are Sean Payton, well, obviously the job needs to be won in camp, but who would you believe should be favored for the job for the season?
Can I say Russell Wilson? No, I'm just kidding.
You wish. That'd be awesome. Imagine that.
Yeah, no, that'd be crazy. But, between those two guys, in all seriousness, you got to pick Jameis Winston. Maybe it's because I'm a Florida State fan. Maybe it's not. I don't know. But I think Jameis Winston's hands down the better option. He's a former number 1 overall pick. Dude led the NFL in passing yards just 2 seasons ago. I think it's an obvious pick to me. To go with Jameis, especially when you look at Taysom Hill's production in the few games he did start last season compared to the few snaps Jameis Winston did play. I think it's just miles better, as well as like just the hype surrounding Jameis Winston in training camp last year and in practice, the way he carries himself. I know it's all kind of hearsay based off the coaching staff, who's not going to, downplay their player, but at the same time, like, they've seen tremendous growth. And I don't think I've actually ever heard Sean Payton, aside from like talking about like Drew Brees, mention a backup quarterback as much as he's talked about Jameis Winston over the past year. So they're obviously very, very, very excited for Jameis Winston and his potential. And I think, getting a 1-year kind of prove it deal, which is a little bit more of a raise than he got with his $1.1 million contract last season. He's getting about, I don't even remember the contract details, but he's only getting a little bit more. It's kind of a prove it deal. He took a discount bonus to stay in New Orleans. So clearly he wants to be there too. And I think he's going to win the starting job in training camp for sure.
So one of Winston's biggest weaknesses, like, yes, he's a guy that can throw a lot of touchdowns, but at the end of the day, sometimes the defense catches those passes. And, that's why Tampa decided to move on. Obviously, when you have the chance to potentially get Tom Brady, other decisions are made. But how does Winston in this offense limit? Obviously, there's a lot of things that need to be done, but what can Sean Payton do specifically for Jameis Winston to limit those passes thrown to the other team?
Well, I think they just do the same thing for Jameis that they've done for Drew Brees, and that's just give him a bunch of weapons. Obviously right now our receiving core is a little bit thin following the release of Emmanuel Sanders. Obviously Jared Cook being gone, which isn't a bad thing, by the way. But, kind of things like that. Our offense has taken a few cuts this year, this offseason, I should say. But, I think they just do the same thing. When you look at Jameis Winston's roster and offense compared to what he has in New Orleans, the only thing that's really an upgrade is the receiving core. But they don't even have Michael Thomas on their team. They just kind of had Mike Evans and Chris Godwin. So if you think about it, like, we have a far more athletic running back, which every quarterback, whenever they need a dump off target, it's going to be a running back. And we happen to have the best one in the NFL, or at least the top 3, you could argue. So, you got Alvin Kamara, who can literally catch anything out of the backfield. For now, we have Latavius Murray, who can pick up 5-6 yards every time he touches the ball. We just got a bunch of playmakers around him. And not to mention, we have one of the NFL's best offensive lines to keep him upright as well, which is one of the biggest things Tampa Bay struggled in during Jameis Winston's tenure. I don't know how much of an impact his LASIK eye surgery is going to help him, but he didn't throw an interception in his few snaps with New Orleans, and he really wasn't even close to throwing an interception. I know he kind of came in spot relief for Drew Brees the game he got injured this past year. He didn't start the games. Drew Brees didn't play, and Taysom Hill did. But, he didn't even really look close to throwing an interception. He looked a little bit off track, but he kind of was just thrust into the game. So you can kind of expect that he's not going to be 100% accurate, but in terms of like throwing interceptions and turning the ball over, I actually think Jameis Winston did very good. And, I noticed, like, I don't think very many Saints fans noticed it, but I always noticed that he always had like 2 hands on the ball whenever he was moving around the pocket, and he didn't go down easy when he took a couple sacks either. So that's always very promising to have a very tough guy in the pocket who's going to still try and scramble outside the pocket and make throws happen, even when there may not necessarily be those throws. And I think that's kind of one of the things that like Jameis Winston's probably been working on with Drew Brees and Sean Payton this past year, is making those proper decisions, when to throw it away, when to just take the sack, stuff like that, which he never really had a mentor in Tampa Bay. He was just kind of thrust into the starting role right away and didn't really have a year to learn under anybody. So this is really kind of just a way to like revive his career. So I'm very, very, very excited to see the potential Jameis Winston has, because like I said earlier, he was a number 1 overall pick, and you don't just go number 1 overall in a draft if you're not talented. So there's obviously the talent is there. It's just a matter of seeing it on a week-to-week basis.
So you both touched on it, on Tampa Bay's resurgence and all the weapons that they have. With Drew Brees out of the picture, is this still a playoff team?
Tampa Bay or New Orleans?
New Orleans.
New Orleans. Yeah, I'd like to say so. I mean, we still have most of our key pieces. The Saints did a good job of making sure we kept our key pieces. Obviously, that comes with a price to pay, but I think, there's plenty of talent out there still that we could go and snag for cheap. And I think there's plenty of talent in the draft this year that we could go and get. We still have a 1st-round pick. We got a couple compensatory picks in the 3rd round. We got a 2nd-round pick. So there's still plenty of talent and especially with the way the Saints drafted, we're going to be able to beef up that receiving unit. We're going to be able to beef up that secondary. But yeah, we re-signed Alvin Kamara. We brought back 2 quarterbacks who know the system. Drew Brees is gone, but in a lot of ways, Drew Brees really limited the Saints in 2020 and also in 2019. Drew Brees' lack of ability to get the ball down the field a lot of times really hurt the Saints. And Jameis Winston is known for his arm strength, and so is Taysom Hill. It may not always be the most accurate arm strength, but those are just the things you get with it. You want a quarterback with arm strength. Okay, you're also gonna have to deal with interceptions from time to time. It's just kind of you take what you get, and that's one of the reasons. I mean, people look at Drew Brees' numbers, you're like, oh, he never throws picks, but he's also not really ever taking deep shots as many times as like Jameis or Taysom would. So that's just one of those things, you just kind of, you take it as it comes. But yeah, they're definitely still a playoff team. We got Alvin Kamara locked up. If barring the Saints keep Latavius Murray, I know I mentioned him a lot, but I think he's really an underrated factor of the Saints offense. Barring they keep Latavius Murray, he'll be at running back 2. They'll have like a little boom and zoom action going. We still got Michael Thomas locked up. We still have, we're working on a contract with Marshawn Lattimore and Ryan Ramczyk. We still got like our entire offensive line locked up. We got Demario Davis locked up on the defense. Marcus Williams is back for another year. Malcolm Jenkins is locked up. There's still plenty of talent in this team for sure. And the fact that the playoffs are even expanding for this upcoming year is even more of a reason why. I mean, I've seen teams make playoffs with far less talent. If you look at like the 2015 Seattle Seahawks, for example, the team that knocked off the Saints in the playoffs a couple of years back, like you can tell, like there's teams with far less talent than we have. And, I think there's no reason why we can't make the playoffs. I don't know if we'll win the division because just of how good that Tampa Bay team is, but I definitely think the playoffs are still in the realm.
So if Jameis is under center, how are we using Taysom?
If Jameis is under center, it depends. It really depends on if they end up drafting or signing another quarterback. Right now, I mean, because we kind of saw it last year or a couple of years ago, actually, whenever Teddy Bridgewater was under center and Taysom had to serve as the backup. They still used him in that utility role, but they didn't use him as prominently in that utility role, which hurts the Saints, like desperately hurts the Saints. So I think that's one of the reasons kind of Taysom got that extension he did, is because of his ability to play everywhere. Although Taysom has been adamant about wanting to strictly play quarterback. We're not strictly play quarterback, but want to be a quarterback in the NFL. He's just best used in that utility wildcat role. And I think he'd still have that role. But like I said, it just kind of depends on, what the Saints decide to do in terms of like another quarterback. I know we kind of had Trevor Siemian on a futures reserve deal. I don't really see him sticking around in the regular season. But, as long as we have a guy to serve as the number 2 quarterback, I mean, granted, it could still be Taysom Hill as the number 2 quarterback behind Winston, and he could still play his utility role, but they just need to make sure they have a third guy, on the team in terms of like just as emergency depth. If they have that, then I could still see Taysom being used in his, tight end receiver role, because the Saints are going to need that desperately. I mean, we have Adam Troutman at tight end, and that's pretty much it. In terms as it currently stands. I know the Saints are probably going to end up signing or drafting a tight end somewhere, probably another quarterback too, and probably some receivers. So I mean, keep an eye out for that. Obviously, that's going to depend. But as the roster stands right now, I don't see there's any way Taysom Hill can't play in a more versatile role that he's continued to do because the Saints desperately need him to.
So you mentioned Taysom Hill's contract. When I received a notification or read the original tweet of the 4 years, $140 million, I was like, what is going on? But in the same article, there's options and, you know, the salary being saved, which I didn't know salary could be saved when $140 million is given to one player. So explain to all of our listeners who, like me, didn't fully understand what the terms were for the 4 years, $140 million contract.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's just a way for the Saints to kind of create more cap space now and kind of create more cap space in the future as well. Like $140 million obviously sounds like a lot of money to be giving a third string quarterback who plays tight end and receiver and special teams. But if you think about it, those years are all voidable past this year. So the Saints extended Taysom Hill, but basically, like, if they don't like his production or whatever the case may be, they could basically cut him and basically take no penalty for it. There'd be like a small whatever, like cap hit for it, but it wouldn't be anywhere near what it would have been if they just outright released him this year. So that's kind of like the gist of the contract. There's obviously a lot more like detailed things that I'm not really even too sure about. But yeah, that's kind of like the gist of it. They're voidable years. So he has this year that was on his original contract and then that extension. So the years on his extension are all voidable. So let's say like he goes out here this year, he doesn't win the starting job, and you know he's really adamant about wanting the starting job somewhere else. The Saints could either trade him and he'd have 4 years on his contract for a different team, or they could just outright release him and not have to deal with a downfall like the Houston Texans might have to with Deshaun Watson if they end up having to release him, or something along the lines of that, where a star quarterback wants to be released, but there's quite a price to pay for releasing a starting quarterback because their contracts are almost always insane. And I mean, Taysom's technically is, but it just kind of gives the Saints more leeway to either trade him and have a nice contract for a team to want to acquire, or release him in case that a situation were to arise. So it's just kind of saving the Saints' ass in a little bit. So,
you know, when I heard about Drew Brees retiring, as you said, you know, Saints fans, we all expected it. Now, I guess the next line of question is, how much longer do you think Coach Payton has, you know, in that organization?
Yeah, so I actually wrote an article, and this is what put me in shambles with Saints Twitter, 100%. I wrote an article for Who Dat Dish this past year, following our 1-2 start, and I was like, how much longer does Sean Payton like really have, you know, and when are we going to stop ignoring the fact that Sean Payton has literally been carried for years by his talent on his team. To be honest, I think Sean Payton probably has a job with the Saints as long as he wants one, just because of what he's brought to the organization. But I mean, the Saints haven't won a Super Bowl since 2010. You know what I mean? So, and we every year we make the playoffs, and we tend to either lose in the first 2 rounds, or we get to the NFC Championship and we can't get over the hump. And like, I mean, granted, yes, we're making the playoffs. It's great, you know, all is well, but I think we can make the playoffs with the roster we have with any coach in the NFL, unless their name is like Bill O'Brien or something, but or Doug Peterson. But other than that, like, I think we're fine. I mean, I know Saints Twitter did not like that article at all, but like, it's reality. Like, it's reality of the situation. Like, we're so content with just making the playoffs and then not going any further than that. It's the same story every single year. We make the playoffs. We got a promising roster. We're getting guys back healthy. We got Drew Brees back healthy. He's ready. We're trying to get him a Super Bowl ring, and it just didn't happen. We didn't get him a second ring. And you know, now that Sean Payton doesn't have Drew Brees to try and pursue a second ring for, if the Saints have a rough year this year, I could see him gone. I mean, I know that the front office is certainly frustrated with Sean Payton's lack of playoff production. And back in the day, like, we used to be unstoppable in the playoffs at home. And now it just seems like people are just taking our number even at home now. So it's just, we just need to figure something out. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like, I love Sean Payton. I mean, and he's pretty much been the head coach of the Saints for as long as I've been a fan of the Saints. So, I mean, it's hard to imagine the New Orleans Saints without Sean Payton, even just as hard as it is to imagine the Saints without Drew Brees. But, you know, if they don't figure something out, it wouldn't surprise me if he got fired or replaced or whatever the case may be. Obviously, he has some tricks up his sleeve and whatnot in terms of how he uses certain players, and he's really just kind of brought trends into the NFL that a lot of coaches just haven't. And, you start to see it a lot more with like teams adding mobile quarterbacks to use in that utility role, like the Eagles did with Jalen Hurts before he became the starter, and kind of what the Ravens did with RG3 a little bit, and Trace McSorley as well. So, I mean, you just kind of see it from other teams in the league that they're kind of taking over, like the Taysom Hill trend type thing. So, yeah, I mean, he brings great things to the Saints, but in a lot of ways, he could also be the team's downfall. And I think this year is gonna be a huge kind of realization in terms of how good of a coach Sean Payton really is, or if Drew Brees has just been bailing him out over the past decade.
So as we get closer to the regular season, this is my final question, Michael. If you had to make one move, yes, the Saints are in cap position, so you can't say Russell Wilson, but if you had the ability to add, another key player, obviously more on the cheaper side or prove-it side, who's someone you should think that they should explore in free agency, or if you think it's someone they could get in the first round of the draft that can make an impact on day one, what's that move you're making as
GM? Man, oh man. Kendall Fuller. Kendall Fuller's the guy I would definitely go for. The Saints need another corner. So I mean, either him or like Richard Sherman. I definitely think we need to focus a little bit more on the defensive side of the ball. The Saints, believe it or not, actually have some pretty solid weapons in their receiving core. Like, they're not big names or anything outside of Michael Thomas, but we have some solid guys in Deontay Harris, Marquez Callaway, Traquan Smith. Obviously, we could use the draft to acquire a guy there if need be. But I think, or even if we use the draft to take a corner like J.C. Horn out of South Carolina or a guy like that. But yeah, I think Kendall Fuller or Richard Sherman would be a great corner to add opposite of Marshawn Lattimore. Him and Janoris Jenkins had some success over the past few seasons. I think if you get one of those guys on a cheaper deal, probably I prefer Kendall Fuller because he's younger. That'd be certainly a great addition to have. It's always, right now we have a major void at our second corner spot right now. It's PJ Williams. So, I mean, that's not ideal. So we should certainly look to bring in another corner. That's probably priority number one before you go for anything else. Just because of the offensive versatility the Saints have. We re-signed Ty Montgomery, who could play that receiver role if need be. Taysom Hill could line up over at receiver if need be. We've seen Alvin Kamara line up at receiver if need be. So we have offensive versatility more so than we have defensive versatility. So we definitely need to keep focusing on the defensive side of the ball because we see how big of an impact a defense has on the New Orleans Saints. So definitely Kendall Fuller, I think, would be my dream scenario for sure.
Cool. Well, Michael, before we let you go, where can our listeners follow you on social media, find your podcast and some of your articles?
Yeah, I'm on Instagram at michael.balko. And then I'm on Twitter at Michael Balko Jr. My podcast is The Michael Balko Show. It's on all major streaming platforms, Spotify, Anchor, Podbean, the whole 9 yards, Apple Podcasts, Google Play Podcasts. It's everywhere. You can find me on YouTube at the same thing, The Michael Balko Show. But yeah, I appreciate it, guys. Thank you for having me on today.
Hey, no problem at all. Don't forget to follow Michael on all forms of social media. Check out his podcast, his articles. We try and get the best here on Down the Block Sports. When we're talking Saints, we want to talk to guys like Michael Balko. So again, thank you so much for taking your time out of your day, man. We really appreciate this.
Yeah, no problem, guys. Thanks for reaching out.
Hey, no problem. That's going to be it for this episode of the Alec Walt Show. I'm Alec Walt alongside Conor Robinson, special guest Michael Balko here on Down the Block Sports. Don't forget to like this video and subscribe to Down the Block Sports for more of our exclusive content. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in, and we'll see you very soon.